Nigeria's population is pushing past 240 million people. We're still hovering around unofficially the 200 million mark, but one or two data points would say we are pushing past 240 million people. Median age is 18.3 years old. In fact, over 60% of the people walking the streets of this country are under the age of 30. Now, think about that for a minute, because this is setting the tone for the conversation we're going to be having in the next hour, right? And these people have been called the powerhouse of the nation. We call them the future. There was a song that I don't like to re-echo anymore. Leaders of tomorrow. Yes, that one, right? And who are we referring to? The youth. But what happens when the document designed to guarantee that future needs, for these key demographic of our nation are actually met? And they don't just end up as a document, a wish list. We're talking about the National Youth Policy 2019 to 2023 that was supposed to change the game, even lowering the youth age bracket to 15 to 29 to make sure that interventions went directly to those transitioning from school to the labor market. A very beautifully thought out document. But since it emerged into the public space, what has come of it? Why are we not seeing that such a well thought out document, as we've been known to do really and truly in this country, has translated into the lives of the very, very important demography of people that we have in this country? Well, we're going to be getting into all of the details with my guests in the studio this afternoon. I've got with me Rosemary Emmanuel. Hello, Rosemary. Welcome.
Hi, Somi.
Good to have you here. Welcome. And I've also got with me Miriam Malu. Welcome, Miriam.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Miriam and Rosemary are Youth Advisory Board members of the Network of Youth for Sustainable Initiatives. Yes? And so we're going to be talking to them about this. Such an important demographic, and one that we are seeing is beginning to just become the tools in the arms of the people who are willing to influence them the most, positively and negatively, but more often than not, as we're seeing, especially going into election seasons, negatively, because they are not being put to the use that they're supposed to be, and then they're used more as tools. All right. So our guests this afternoon have been doing some extensive work on the National Youth Policy, so I'll just let them talk to us about it. From then till now, what has happened and what has your initiative done to see that this policy is actually used for good and it's not just a document on paper? I'll start with you, Rosemary.
Thank you so much, Somi. So, right from January down to this moment, we have been having national consultations with youth across 3 geopolitical zones here in Nigeria: the North Central, Northeast, and South. We had 3 physical consultations and 2 virtual consultations with over 500 young people across Nigeria. Now, why did we have these consultations? When we looked at the National Youth Policy, we saw a document that was beautiful, well written, but execution wasn't there. And looking at this document, we saw that the National Youth Policy, in fact, it expired in 2023. So it means from 2023 down to this moment, Nigeria did not have a National Youth Policy. So looking at this gap, we thought, what is the future of we young people here in Nigeria? If the only document we have, the only roadmap the government has put in place to make sure we have good lives, to make sure our future is bright enough, it is non-existent. So what becomes of us as young people? So looking at this gap, we began these consultations with these young people across different parts of Nigeria to listen to them. We asked them, what is the problem? What do you think is the problem? Now, one of the key responses we got from these young people, one said that when she went through the document, she saw the aspirations, she was happy about what the government wanted to do for we young people. But the young people were engaged during the formation stage of the document. Now, after the youth policy was launched in 2019, down to 2023, youth were nowhere in the picture. We were not in the table, we were not consulted. And going through the documents, we saw that the government stated that we would have like midpoint reviews and endpoint reviews of these documents. We would have reports, we would monitor, we would have like a monitoring framework to see what this document, what this policy has been doing for young people. But after the consultation and all our findings, none of these were done. There was no midline assessment, there was no endline assessment, there were no reports, there were no dashboard to measure the impact. And looking at all of these, one key factor we saw in place was even the document stated that when we had consultations with the Ministry of Youth, there were no funds, no money, there was no budget allocated to fund all of these beautiful aspirations on this document. Now, because of this, every young person out there has been agitated. Young people are saying, we want to be in the table. We want to be in the design stage. We want to be co-creators of this national youth policy. We cannot sit. We cannot relax. In fact, inside in that document, we saw that people living with disabilities were captured beautifully. In fact, it was stated that 10% of education, of employment will be given to people living with disability, but up to date, there was nothing. So with these consultations, with all of these findings, we got to find out that there were so many gaps in this policy that wasn't taken into consideration when this policy was drafted. And one of these is having consultations with high-level stakeholders. We found out that there was no direct budget lines for these policies. Now, inside of all of these policies, you would see there were so many plans for education, there were so many plans for investment in technology, ICT, entrepreneurship, everything on that document, but there was no funding directed to the implementation of all of these.
It was time was taken. He sat down, drafted this document, but afterwards it wasn't implemented. It wasn't implemented. No money was allocated to it at all.
One thing we found out is that money came for youth development. But during our findings, we saw that most of this money that comes into state governments or other agencies for youth development were submerged into constituency projects. So now most youth development funds are now submerged into different constituency projects and all that. So we cannot even track or measure what is happening in these constituencies when it comes to youth development.
But you were able to track that monies actually did leave the federal government coffers to the states.
Yes, it goes to the states. So the Ministry of Youth doesn't have the budget, the finance to finance the national youth policy. So now we have to work directly with state governments, governors, and all of these people, national and legislators that have this budget in their constituencies to help and support youth to be able to carry out this project. So that is why we are having this awareness today. There is no direct budget line for youth development. Now, what comes to the National Ministry of Youth, it can't even do anything in the document, the National Youth Policy. So today we are here, and it is so sad that listening to young people speak hard facts on the challenges they have been facing. Imagine graduating from school and you're in the labor market and there is nothing for you. And that brings us to one of the key challenges we found when we were reviewing that document. Now, the National Youth Policy 2019 to 2023 had a revision of the age bracket for youth in our country. So we saw that before it was 18 to 35, but currently it is 15 to 29. Now, lots of young people, in fact, in the universities now, some are 30, some are 35, and they are praying so hard and working so hard to finish up from the university and come into the job market. And we're telling them that when you come into the job market, there is no intervention, government intervention for youth that covers you. You're not covered if government is doing a project and they say, oh, we want to empower youth. It is only people from ages 15 to 29 that are covered. Now, those outside of 29, what becomes of their future? That is the big question now. What happens to these people? And looking at all of them, we began to do more research, and we saw that In fact, if you look at it today, the Japa culture we're talking about, lots of people from ages 30 and above, they are trying to leave the country. So we see a lot of brain drain happening, people migrating, people looking for the next big thing because the national youth policy we have doesn't cater for everyone. So there is a policy gap.
Well, more like the national youth policy we had, because you said since 2023 it hasn't been. Well, just to be clear, are there any moves by this administration to revisit it? Look at it, amend, and all of that, and then reintroduce it.
Yes.
There are moves.
Yes.
What stage is it at currently?
Last week we were with the British High Commission, and we had stakeholders, representatives from the Ministry of Youth, and all of them there. And the current status of things is the Ministry of Youth are already working on their consultations. They have worked on their consultations. At the moment, I think they are in the collation stage. They are collecting all of the findings from CSOs and everyone to merge and then release the national youth policy. So currently, the national youth policy is almost at the verge of being released, the new national youth policy, as we speak. So the National Ministry of Youth have been doing their consultations, their findings, and working towards developing a new national youth policy. So that's where we are at.
Speaking of the Ministry of Youth Development, I did hear you say that for the 2019-2023 youth policy, they were not funded at all. They were not funded at all. You said that, which is interesting because I see that at that time they were the Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports Development, and they were the chief custodian, architect, and driver of that policy. They didn't just participate. It was drafted directly under their supervision alongside partners like the UNFPA in Nigeria. So, which brings me to the question, what's going to happen any differently now if they architected the document, the policy document 2019-2023, and then they were completely left out of it? Are they doing anything differently now to ensure that monies actually get to them to implement this particular policy? That network of youth for sustainable initiatives, and we're talking about something that looks to be making a comeback, which is the National Youth Policy. But to make sure that it comes back and comes back well, we need to make sure that whatever it was that made it fail in the first place does not repeat itself again. Because the National Youth Policy 2019 to 2023 apparently committed to incredibly specific measurable targets, some of which were creating 3.7 million jobs per year, which we do need, establishing 500,000 mass literacy centers, which we absolutely do need, and training 10,000 entrepreneurs per state, which would be great for the youths in that state as well. But because no dedicated funds were ring-fenced to achieve these targets, they were almost entirely abandoned. The architectural plan required 12 different federal ministries to cooperate by a multi-sectoral youth development technical working group. But in practice, this interagency cooperation never took off. The Ministry of Youth Development was largely left to carry the policy alone, but without the financial muscle or authority to command other ministries such as labor, education, or finance to align their programs with the youth policy. So instead of implementing the policy as a cohesive framework, the federal government bypassed it to launch standalone ad hoc political interventions. And of course, when you do things in a manner of a silo, such as something so significant as this, you can rest assured that it will not have the desired impact. So, Miriam is here with me alongside Rosemary, and we're saying now that it's looking to make a comeback, how do we get it right? What are the things that are being done? What is your organization doing to ensure that if it does make this comeback, the National Youth Policy, it will actually serve the budding, growing, ever vibrant and ever energetic young population of Nigeria?
Thank you so much again for having us here. So Rosemary already covered the research and the work that we have done already on the National Youth Policy and the consultations we had, the high-level stakeholder engagements we had. And we have come up with a few recommendations for what should be done and how it should be done better. Number one is finance. We already spoke about money and how it is not really coming in. So it emphasized, that is the findings we have, and our recommendation emphasized that youth development needs to have sustainable financing. So it's not just about allocating the money, but ensuring that the funds are properly coordinated, transparent, and there should be transparent tracking. We should be able to track where this money is coming from, where it's going, and make sure that it's reaching the programs that this money is meant for. Number two is co-creation. She already mentioned co-creation. In the previous National Youth Policy, we saw that youth were only involved in the designing of the youth policy, but when it came to implementation, when it came to monitoring, when it came to accountability, the youth were nowhere to be found. So now we're recommending...
I just want to be sure, when you say they were nowhere to be found, as in they disappeared or they were excluded from the process?
They were excluded.
Oh, okay.
Nowhere to be found. They just were there during the designing stage, but then they were excluded when it came to implementation and monitoring. So now our recommendation is that youth should not only be consulted when the policies are being drafted, they should be involved in each stage of this youth policy. When it comes to implementation, we should have youth there. When it comes to monitoring and evaluating these policies, we should have them there. So we should make sure that young people move from being consulted to being co-creators, as we already mentioned. And speaking of monitoring and evaluation, monitoring and accountability, we also recommend that every institution should be involved. Every institution involved, should have clear responsibilities. We should make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to do, and we should have proper tracking frameworks, for tracking the implementation processes. We should make sure that progress is tracked publicly, not privately, because in the previous National Youth Policy, they said there was going to be midterm evaluations, there was going to be final evaluations, there was going to be reports published on youth development, but we didn't have that in the last National Youth Policy. So now we're recommending that even as there's going to be there's going to be
So what she's saying is,
yes,
we should have a national youth policy dashboard where every finding that we are doing in the implementation of national youth policy is being put publicly, so every young person sees and monitors and hold every ministry or agency responsible, accountable.
Okay.
And then lastly, just to add,
yes,
we should have legislative backing. Now, if members of the legislature have backing for the national youth policy, they would support it every step of the way. So if this backing comes from the National Assembly, would have like a budget pipeline, a framework where money is being disbursed to finance this policy, and the legislators are backing and supporting these policies to be enacted.
Okay.
Can I just add?
Yes, you can.
I don't mind skipping earlier. I just want to add that government and the private sector and development partners and civil society all have a role to play in supporting young people and in ensuring that this national youth policy is implemented right this time around.
I mean, we say that a lot of the time. I don't think that our government and political office holders are not unaware of just how important things like this are. And so I would just say, as we wrap up, that apparently this advocacy has to continue. It will have to go beyond this one conversation that we've had. We need to really, really keep tabs on it, because data shows that Nigerians are among the hardest working on the continent. Yet young Nigerians specifically, yet 96% of them are trapped in the volatile informal sector. Volatile. And I say this again, especially in reference to what our First Lady said about the informal sector. That's not to say that there's no dignity in, the informal sector, or, looking to start businesses and start small and all of that. But it is largely volatile. And so if we have policies like this in place, perhaps youth have more to aspire to than just looking to I mean, we have such great minds. So it would be great for a young person to say, there is an opportunity for me to start something in STEM, to start something in tech, to start something in, yeah. And if really and truly your calling is to fry akara and kuli kuli, nothing wrong there as well. But that is not what we should be aspiring to. There's so much more to the informal sector. So when you have policies like this that are in place, it gives so much more for the youth to aspire to, especially given how volatile our informal sector is. So when we look at government youth programs, whether from skill acquisition to loans, they must be designed for the harsh realities of the economy that the Nigerian youth are currently facing. It should not be disconnected from what the Nigerian youths need to actually survive. So just wanted to say that in closing as we wrap up. So young Nigerians, if you're listening, pay attention. Our guests are following up on the current national youth policy. We'd very much like to see it come to light before the end of this administration, because what has happened effectively is that the last one ran through the last administration and had absolutely no impact, and another tenure is about to end, and we've seen nothing for the youth. So we very much like to see something that is birthed even right now before the end of this administration. So whatever work is being done, youths, young people, you need to get on board, you need to get engaged, you need to find out what is happening for me as a young person in Nigeria, so that this term Oludo uprising will not be what is used to coin the average Nigerian, because we've been so conditioned, so much so that we would rather be entertained than educated and find these vocations for ourselves. So there is a document in place, and this conversation is to say, don't be an ostrich. Don't put your head in the ground. As a young person, find out what our guests from the Network of Youth and Sustainable Initiatives are doing. Find out how you can get involved in ensuring that this national youth policy comes to light, and that it is targeted at ensuring that it is, that your life is made better as a young person. It must not end up being another wish list. It must not end up being another political reference point. It must be an actual document that leaves the pages of the paper that it is written on and shows in the lives of the young Nigerian person. So having said that, I'll say thank you to my guests who have been very, very gracious to come and make us aware of this. Thank you, Rosemary Akwoga Emmanuel. And thank you, Miriam Malum. It's been a pleasure having you here. Thank you. All right, Abuja, that's it for my...